And welcome back. I'm Sean Noble.
And I'm Chris Clements.
This is Light Beer, Dark Money. We've got a fantastic guest today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, one of my, I would call him a mentor and a friend and just a great man of faith, hailing from the old Pueblo, Tucson, Arizona. I think you're our first guest from Tucson. And
that's a shame.
And it is a shame. We need to have more. But Doug Martin.
But it wouldn't make sense to have anybody other than Doug.
Yes, that is true.
Right.
So, but we plan to have many more. But Doug Martin of Good News Communications, and community leader, faith leader, friend, mentor, Jesus follower. I can go on and on and on. Father, grandfather, dedicated husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the things.
All the things we aspire to be. So, Doug, welcome to yet another exciting edition of Light Beer, Dark Money. We're really happy to have you.
Glad to be on the show.
Well, Doug, why don't you kick us off a little bit? Tell a little bit about yourself. Tell about your maybe your professional journey, your faith journey, because I know that's both kind of go hand in hand. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about that.
Well, if I do my bio, it'll take about an hour. So hopefully everyone was not kidding. Let me just give you the short version. So I came to Tucson 37 years ago, and I came from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And while I was growing up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was a movement that happened there during the Jesus movement, which many of your viewers are probably familiar with. And there was a campaign they did on billboards called I Found It. And I don't know if anybody remembers that, but I kept seeing these billboards that said I found it. I kept wondering, what did they find? And it just kind of got my curiosity. And it was one of the things that led me to a relationship with Jesus Christ. And that really changed my life, because at that time, I was working in mainstream media, and I was at the top FM station in the market. I'd been a DJ, then in sales. And, my pastor asked me to pray about going to work for the Christian station, and I didn't even know what a Christian station was. So I ended up working for the Christian station. After I prayed about it, I felt like God said, go. And then 37 years ago, my boss wanted me to move to Tucson because he was buying a station here. And long story short on that, I came out here, and then his deal fell through, and then we ended up buying the station. It took some time to kind of work it out, because they owed double what the station was worth, and I took over all the debt. And then we began our journey here in media. And since then, I've been very involved in the community. At one time, we had 4 radio stations here and 3 in other parts of the state. And then we sold the radio stations 3 years ago, and now we do marketing and public relations. But I realized a few years ago, because my focus really was on my faith and working in the Christian community, but I realized if we just stayed in our own little community, we would not impact our community much. It'd be all this, you're staying in the walls of the church, but not going outside the walls to really affect things. And Chris, as you and I've talked about many times, since I think you're like 4th generation or something here, Tucson has always been behind. We've always lagged behind the rest of the state when you look at all the, the metrics, whether it's, economically, whether it's, education, job creation. The only thing we've led in is poverty and crime. So this is really where my focus is now, is to try to impact our community and make it a better place.
Well, Doug, you said something to me a couple years ago, maybe during one of our lunches that were many, when I was going through my own life transition, selling a family legacy, selling a family company, and then moving on to following the life of faith. And you said that you can always tell a thriving community by how well churched it is. And I had never, ever thought about that. And then I kind of did my own research within Tucson, looking at the interior of Tucson and the issues that you just explained very well: poverty, crime, homelessness, economic depravity, all these different things. And then looking towards the outside of Tucson, which I called in a in a very well received op-ed I did for the Arizona Daily Star called "The Other Tucson." And in fact, if you draw a line in Tucson right down the Rito River, if you go north of Tucson, you enter really a different place where those issues aren't as either apparent or acute. And you were right. Those areas outside of Tucson proper, in the areas of Marana and Oro Valley and the Catalina foothills, and even going east, towards the Pantano and Tanque Verde area, are well churched. And so I found that fascinating. Whereas the core of Tucson is actually really lacking. Why is that? Why? And how did you come to that conclusion?
Well, it's kind of the chicken or the egg kind of a thing. Which comes first? The lack of churches, does it lead to poverty and crime and and just despair? Or is it that those things then leave us with no faith or no church presence? But if you look at the Tucson proper or the core of Tucson, there's only maybe 4 or 5 vibrant churches in a population of 500,000 people. And I mean, then you look at the surrounding areas, you mentioned crossing over the Rito, there's dozens of vibrant churches. And we also know that many people won't cross the Rito from Oro Valley or from the foothills. They don't want to even go into the city of Tucson. That's a shame, because when we've got a community that's falling apart, we should want to fix it. But I personally believe that what it is, that your faith component in a community directly reflects on what happens in that community, whether it's prosperous, whether it's safe, whether it's well educated, all the things that we look at that show that a community is moving forward, that's actually progressing. The people on the left will talk about being progressives, but actually what they do take us backwards, not forwards. So I really do believe that part, is super important, and that we need to see, churches from the outside, from the surrounding areas, move into the inside, start works on the inside, and we need to see those churches, prosper.
Yeah, what you're saying basically, we need more U City churches, which was a church you and I were intimately involved with, which was a church plant from Catalina Foothills Church for the most part, and went into the belly of the beast, I would say, on 6th Avenue and 6th Street in Tucson, right next to the university and everything else.
Well, that's true. And I mean, if you look at it strictly just on the numbers, there was a Barna study that was done a few years ago that they looked at the 12 least Christian areas in the country, and Tucson ranked in the top 12.
Oh my.
And they had things that they looked at, whether there was church attendance, Bible study, belief in God, that kind of thing. Well, Tucson was on the bottom. And if you looked at the map, it was really weird, because you saw places like San Francisco on the West Coast and New York on the East Coast. And then you see one dot in the middle, and it was Tucson, Arizona. So that speaks a lot about our community. It speaks a lot to the area of also how the elected officials view Tucson, the city of Tucson. I heard this morning on the radio that that Tucson High School is having a drag queen contest this weekend, sponsored by the school. And it's like sponsored by TUSD, the school district. And you're going, oh my goodness. Now, would that happen at Catalina Foothills or Ironwood Ridge High School or CDO High School? No, because the parents wouldn't allow that type of thing to happen. But this is commonplace, in the city of Tucson, focusing on things that don't really matter, stuff like that instead of trying to fix the streets, lower the crime rate, raise the economic opportunity, they're focusing on having a drag queen festival or contest. I mean, that's just bizarre to me, but that is the way it is. So we need to make inroads. And I spend a lot of my time working with elected officials. I also have every other month, I have a meeting that I put together with business leaders for our city manager. to try to work in the community to make it a better place. And we need to be active and involved and engaged. And I believe that's our part. As followers of Jesus Christ, we need to also make a difference in our community and not just stay north of the Rillito.
Well, it strikes me as part of the issue, I think, is for whatever reason, the political leadership in Tucson, whether it be city council, Pima County, state legislative.
Yeah, you have a Pima
districts.
County administrator, Chuck Huckleberry. He's been there how long?
That's got to be
40
Well, he's
30,
been
40
the
years.
administrator for like 22 years, but he's been actually in Pima County government
Yeah,
for like
forever.
35 years or 36 years. But,
I was gonna
Chuck,
say
I don't know
40
if you
years.
guys know this, but Chuck had a bad bicycle accident a few months ago, and he is not yet recovered.
Oh,
So
that's
he's
I think I had
now-
heard something about that. So we
Yeah,
wish him
very
speedy
sad.
recovery
We're-
for sure.
We're praying for him, but yeah, he is. They talk about him being really the king of the county, and he does have a very powerful influence here. And for the most part, we have elected officials. Well, I mean, all of our elected officials are Democrats. I mean, the only Republican elected official we have here is Steve Christie in the county supervisor. So, we are controlled by Democrats, and you look at that, you got the lack of churches, we're controlled by Democrats, and then look at the result. We're not a prosperous community. We're last in Arizona as far as economic recovery, since COVID, since the pandemic. I mean, that tells you something. I mean, we're 18th in the country right now for homicides.
Oh,
Wow.
So that's fairly serious. We're the least safe city in Arizona. The good news on that part is the city manager, Mike Ortega, who is really a very sensible, wise person. I thank God that the mayor and council still have him as the city manager. He selected Chad Kasmer to be the police chief after Chris Magnus was promoted to Homeland Security. You may have heard about that, the
Right.
director of Homeland Security. And Chad Kasmer is an excellent choice. He's respected by the officers, the rank and file. He's come up through the department. He's a native Tucsonan. He is very, very on it as far as he understands what needs to happen, and he's got a plan to reduce the crime here in Tucson. And I believe we have good things coming with him as the chief.
He's not going to be bowing down to the defund the police mantra of the left.
No, but he's found a way to communicate this, and so is the city manager, to the mayor and council, where they understand that the defund thing isn't working and that their rhetoric. I mean, two of our council members led protests, in the summer, and they were out there leading the protests against our police. One of them actually got up in the face of the officers and said, "You work for me," and so that kind of radical, weird stuff has not paid dividends here in Tucson. It hasn't worked. A lot of business people I know don't want to invest within the city of Tucson. They're going to go to Marana or Oro Valley or Vail, instead of in the city of Tucson, because they're concerned about public safety.
Well, and because
So I
those
think-
communities have demonstrably, shown
Right.
that they're willing to invest in their police and fire and roads and everything else.
Right.
The three basic things that cities are supposed to invest in.
Exactly, but the city manager, Mike Ortega, and with Chad Kasmer as the chief, they are respected, by the mayor and council. So I feel like it's finally kind of turned a corner. I don't expect the mayor to get out in front and start, saying, I want to increase the police budget and I support law enforcement and go rah rah. But she now realizes, I think, and the council realizes, they need to take a different direction. That the direction we've been going has not been working.
Well, to that point, if you really want to know how far Tucson has fallen, other than the statistics that you give, Regina Romero is a avid, admitted socialist. She has been pictured with none other than Bill de Blasio at a recent mayor's conference in Washington, D.C. And so that's kind of what you're dealing with down there.
Well, it's true, and I like her personally. I mean, it's just a person. I like her,
Yeah.
but she she is very heavily influenced um, by folks on the far left. I mean, as you know, her husband works for Raul Grijalva. I think he's the chief of staff for Raul. She also works for the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a far left environmentalist group. They
Yeah.
pay her, I think, 80,000 a year, and she's a Latina outreach coordinator for them. So that has compromised her, and the people she's listening to are really totally on the left. A friend of ours, who I know you know, Cody Ritchie, supported her for mayor because she was going to win. And we met with her, and I actually supported her as well. And since the election, she's not reached out to the business community. She doesn't, she told us she would. She told us she would listen to us, and that she agreed with about 70% of the things that we proposed. But since then, nothing. And some of it could have to do with COVID, everything was shut down. But I kind of think she's listening only to the voices on the left.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty apparent, and unfortunate for Tucson. One of the other statistics that there's all this attention right now on Phoenix and the economic growth that's happening here, the population growth, and I mean, Phoenix has regained most of its job loss from since the pandemic, and we have gobs of companies moving here.
Yeah.
And then to your point, when you look at Tucson, I mean, the latest census data basically shows that Tucson has not grown at all in the last 10 years. It only made up some of the losses that it had during the pandemic. And it's just sad. And I'm speaking from authority. I grew up in Tucson. I went to high school in Tucson. We had a business in Tucson that was longstanding for many, many years. And what was so frustrating is that these issues haven't changed. And the leadership hasn't changed. I was on, all the different business boards, and one of my great frustrations of being on those boards is that so many, whether it's the Tucson Chamber or Southern Arizona leadership, they're not willing to challenge the status quo, and if anything, they want to go along and get along on every major public policy issue. And they haven't met a tax increase they've never supported. And in a very tax and regulatory sensitive business that I was in, which was alcohol distribution and beer, I was always fighting them on the latest and greatest tax increase that would affect my customers and affect my business. And it was crazy. And I pray for Tucson. We talk about that all the time, Doug, just that things would change.
Well, there is two things that have happened since you've left. One is Southern Arizona Leadership Council. The new director is General Ted Maxwell.
Yeah.
I don't know if you knew Ted.
Ted was just really coming on, when we sold our business and then when we made the difficult decision to leave.
Well, he has really been a major change, and he is respected in the community. He was able to negotiate the Regional Transportation Association's deal, which basically the city of Tucson was going to exit out of that. That would have been catastrophic for Tucson. As far as roads, and you know how bad our roads are here. I think they're some of the worst in the country, potholes and just terrible things. But he was able to negotiate that, and he is respected. So there is a bright spot there. And the other thing we're seeing is there is economic development, but it's not in the city of Tucson. So you're seeing that in Oro Valley and Marana. We're getting a lot of companies moving in. The biotech thing is growing. The optics thing is growing in Oro Valley. But the concern I have, and many of us have, is then that leaves a hole. You've got all this stuff happening on the outside, but in the city of Tucson, you've got homelessness, you've got poverty, you've got crime, and you've got degradation.
And weeds. Don't forget the weeds.
Weeds are a problem.
That's one thing that everybody says when they go to Tucson. And something that, you mentioned Cody Ritchie. Cody and I kind of led this Clean Up Tucson effort many, many years ago.
Right.
But can we just get the weeds pulled off the side of the street to
Yeah.
clean up the city and make it more presentable to the businesses that may or may not want to move there?
What I've never understood is why is it that Tucson hates sidewalks?
Oh,
There just aren't any sidewalks.
yeah. Well, that goes back to the roads, because the roads are so old
Yeah.
that to get a road actually expanded or repaved is like, it's like an act of God, really.
Yeah.
And so
I mean,
and
it's
that would include a sidewalk.
Yeah.
You have to put those in now. And
The,
there's a resistance to that.
right. I feel like, so Doug, you talked about how you came from Albuquerque. I have described Albuquerque to people who don't know as Phoenix 30 years ago. But there's a lot of similarities between Albuquerque and Tucson.
Mhm.
I mean, they literally, as they are both very far behind where they should be as southwestern population hubs, and it's because of their local leadership. And I think that your observation that there is a tie-in to a lack of a community of faith that's robust is a part of that, because I just think that that there is a mentality of some in Tucson. I perceive. I'm not an expert in Tucson. I avoid Tucson, frankly. I mean, I'm not afraid to say it. I have a sister. I go down there for Thanksgiving. She lives in the foothills, but it's never been a destination for me, because it's depressing.
Tell us how you really
I'll tell you
think.
this from my perspective, well, I used to go up to meetings in Phoenix, when I was on the statewide board for the Arizona Broadcasters Association. And I remember asking this group of business people what they thought of Tucson, and they started off on the things that you're talking about. They said, well, why don't you guys not have any sidewalks? What's the deal with your roads? Why are your roads so bad? And why are you so backwards as far as freeways? There's no way to get across town and all that kind of stuff. And and then one guy just said, well, I like Tucson because it's quaint. And it just kind of like hit me, and I walked away depressed. I mean, every time I used to go to Phoenix, I'd be a little depressed coming back to Tucson, because I would see the reality of the way things are down here. And when you're just in it, you don't see it. But I mean, it's always been that way. And part of the thing with the roads, Chris, I think, is they didn't budget enough money to put in sidewalks when they would do roads here. And so they just never got done.
Well, up until I was maybe 10 or 11, there weren't bridges going across Cerrito from Craycroft or Sabina Canyon Road. I mean, you had to dip into the wash, and if it rained, you had to go around. And I think Craycroft had a bridge, but Sabino Canyon didn't, and Tanque Verde didn't. So it was nuts. But first of all, we don't want to rip on Tucson completely, because I think the frustration is, and having lived there for so long, there's so many other good things about Tucson in terms of its natural beauty. The community there is absolutely incredible. Actually, there's a very positive stat that from a generosity standpoint, Tucson is one of the most generous communities in the country, which is unbelievable. Per capita, it actually is more so than Phoenix.
It's true. There's over 3,000 nonprofit groups here, more per capita than anywhere else in the country. And
wow.
Now, I would argue that there's a lot of duplication there. Sure. There's nonprofit groups that should merge or go away. So there is some waste there, but we are on that side of it. We're a very generous community. And what you mentioned about the washes and how people used to have to go through them.
I knew you would remember that.
Well, yeah,
not many people
just
do.
Before I got here in '82, there was a flood, and I don't know how old you were then, but that flood changed everything. But Chuck Huckleberry, who we've talked about, the one good thing Chuck did was they got money from the federal government to do the things you talk about, some bridges. They shore up the banks on the Riitos, the arroyos. And what he did then was he said, well, look, I got this money to shore up the arroyos. I'm going to turn it into bike lanes.
Yeah.
And that became our loop, which was really a great thing. I mean, there's 130 miles of road, of loop, bicycle loop that you can ride on and not be in traffic. You're going around the whole city of Tucson. People come from all over the country to cycle here.
Yeah.
My next door neighbors are retired, cyclists. They are competitive cyclists. They bring teams here, people like George Hancappy and people like that were on the Lance Armstrong team and all that. They come here to train. So we've got that bright spot. We don't have sidewalks, but we do have bike lanes. I mean, the bike lanes are everywhere in Tucson, and it's because of Chuck.
Yeah.
Chuck
Well, they
saw
named the
that
loop
part.
after him, didn't they?
Yes,
Did
they
they?
did.
Yeah, they
Wow.
named the loop
The
after
Huckleberry
him.
Loop?
Which, I mean, give credit where credit is due, right? He really,
Yeah.
that was one of his big projects for a better part of several decades, and he got it done.
Doug,
He did
what
get that.
obviously you've been there for a long time. What keeps you there, and what gives you hope as you look into the future for Tucson?
Well, when I
Yeah.
first got here, I tried to get back to Albuquerque many times. I was going to merge our company with another broadcasting company out of Albuquerque, and then I was going to move back to Albuquerque, but the doors shut, and I felt like God closed those doors. And after I'd been here about 6 or 7 years, I started liking it, and it's like Chris talked about. I mean, once you get your roots into a community, you get to know people, you're involved. You get involved on different boards and organizations, and then you're pretty well committed.
Yeah.
At this point in my life, I couldn't see leaving Tucson. I have a love for this community. I want to see this community change. I want to see it become a better place. My 4 children are here, my 9 grandchildren, and they're very committed here. My daughter is a competitive cyclist. She won the Tour de Tucson. She won the Nogales Classic. She took second in the tour through the Pines. I mean, in the last couple of years, this has become her life. Her and her husband don't want to leave here
Yeah.
because they love cycling. They love it. I mean, that's their whole life. They were looking at moving to Chicago or some other place because they didn't like Tucson. But then when they started riding bikes, everything changed. So my hope is that this community will, instead of becoming a brain drain, where all of our talent ends up going to Phoenix after they graduate from the U of A. They'll have jobs here where younger people will go, I just love the environment here in Tucson. It is a very pretty place. We have a lot of natural beauty. We have Mount Lemon. We have the cycling, as I mentioned before, the hiking, everything else. I'm hoping that we can make this place a much better place where people want to stay and grow here, where young people won't want to leave after they graduate from the U of A. So that's where I'm at this point in my life.
That's good.
Well, that's where a lot of people are in terms of wanting what's best for Tucson. And it's an amazing place in terms of its surrounding beauty and the community and all the different things that we've said. The interior is what we talk about, and education is what we talk about too. I mean, you mentioned TUSD. It's probably the biggest blight of Tucson is the public school system there, and I don't. Do you see that changing at all in this next cycle? Is there an ability to blow up TUSD a little bit? The community leaders there love to talk about education, and Tucson has some of the best private schools in the state, some of the best charter schools in the state. It has a public school that is one of the best public schools in the nation, and it's part of TUSD, and that's University High.
Mm-hmm.
But the system can't get out of its own way, and I think you demonstrated why.
Well, I think, there's a saying that, some people would rather be the captain on a sinking ship than the first mate on a luxury yacht.
Yeah.
And I think there are people like that here in Tucson. They would rather, see Tucson go downhill so long as they can maintain their power. And I see TUSD kind of like that. Adley de Grijalva, who's also a county supervisor, is on the TUSD board. There's Superintendent Trujillo. I heard a speech he gave at commencement, and you would think it was given by AOC. I mean, so there's some folks, that just want to keep things the way they are. And as TUSD is going downhill, they're selling schools off. They're losing, students. I don't think there's going to be a wake-up call anytime soon, because they still have power. And even if they're the captain of a sinking ship, at least they're the captain. But I'm hopeful that outside pressure, from the other districts is, as you mentioned, there's some great things happening. You got University High, but you also have Basis here,
Sure.
which is in the top, I think, 4 or 5 schools in the country. You've got Catalina Foothills, which is a great school. You've got Ironwood, Ridge, CDO. These are all really good schools. And then we work with many of the private schools. We have Desert Christian, we have Push Ridge Christian, we have Cassis. We work with these schools. They're our clients, and they're seeing their enrollments go up. And if the voucher plan that Paul Boyer put forth, you guys know Senator Boyer, he's
Sure.
a family friend. He went to Bible college with my son-in-law. So we know him really well. And that voucher program, if it goes through, could expand the opportunities for kids to get out of TUSD, which I think would be a good thing. If kids can get out of TUSD into charter schools, into schools like Push Ridge or Desert Christian, eventually TUSD has to turn around. But right now, no, I don't see any in the short term they're going to do anything different.
At an SALC board meeting one time, I called TUSD a prison. And oh my goodness.
I'm sure you got a earful for that.
I got an earful. But then I just rattled off the data, and nobody really had much to say after that.
Yeah.
But it's good that these other alternatives exist, and they exist in a place like Arizona.
And who gets trapped in that prison? It's the kids on the bottom end of the spectrum.
Absolutely.
It's the kids that can't get out. It's the parents that are working 2-3 jobs and they don't know what's really going on. It's the kids that are the least fortunate that get stuck in that prison, and that's really a shame.
Yeah.
Doug, thank you for being with us. I think we're going to have to continue this discussion. Tucson is it's an important part of the state. It's got a great history, and we need to
second largest
continue to
state, and it's a huge bastion of economic. It can be a huge bastion of economic development. It's got the University of Arizona Wildcat basketball team, which generates a lot of
Well, I mean, the fact that the U of A's there needs to be,
but also from a military standpoint, and you see what's going on in the world. I mean, Tucson plays an important role in that. With Honeywell, with Raytheon, and with the base. I mean, they're going to be, all eyes are going to be on Tucson.
Yeah.
For the foreseeable future as we enter into a new world.
Yeah.
With Russia doing what they're doing, which we're going to get to here in another podcast.
Yeah.
Well, and right now, I mean, with what's happening in the Ukraine, Javelin missiles are one of the difference makers for the Ukrainian troops and for the people that are fighting this oppressive, tyrannical regime. And they're made here in Raytheon. I mean, Raytheon is right here in Tucson. So that's a big bright spot, for our community.
Yeah. Raytheon is tremendous patriots work there.
Yep.
So we appreciate them tremendously. Well, Doug, we can keep going and going and going, but thank you so much for being on. Thanks for all you're doing for the old Pueblo and all that you do for men and women of faith, including myself and my wife and our family.
I appreciate being on Light Beer, Dark Money. And I think, Chris, the best thing you could do is move back to Tucson and help us make the place a better place.
Maybe we can do, we could do a broadcast down there and record down there and have some different folks on. That would be a cool thing.
We could take this on the road.
Yeah.
Tucson would be a good stop. Important one.
Yep.
So thank you, Doug.
Thank you, brother. God bless.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good one.